if you think you can't wear a hat, it's really not true. You can, you just haven't discovered yet which style of hat best suits your face. Anyway, I'm going into all of that and more fun stuff in the online felt hat workshop, which will be launching later this spring or early summer. And in the process of putting that hat workshop together, I wanted to share a couple of methods for creating hat blocks. And I couldn't fit them both in, so of course I saved the best method for the workshop, but I thought I would share this sort of simple method which has limited application, but still it has a niche, and so I thought I'd share that with you today. So first of all, for those of you who are just new to felting, I wanted to give a quick little review of, hat blocks and why you need them. So this is an antique hat block here, has both a crown portion as well as a brim block or flange, it's sometimes referred to. And you can find these with relative ease at antique shops and or on eBay. And actually this flange isn't the right size for this brim, for this crown, but I just grabbed it for the purpose of the video. Anyway, they usually should be matched, flange to crown. And you'll have different sizes, of course, because you'll be making hats for different people's heads. So ultimately, if you really want to get into making hats and make them for family and friends, you're going to need to collect a whole range of sizes of crowns as well as the brim or flanges if in fact you want to make brimmed hats. So it can get costly, even though these can be reasonably inexpensive, and it can also take up a lot of space if you want to collect this a lot, every size of this type of block. So for a while, and I hope again soon, I'll be marketing the blockheads here, which give you every size from like around 19 inches to 23. So instead of having to buy all these individual blocks and then store them because they take up quite a bit of space, you can invest in one item which will cover all of the various sized crowns that you would be interested in making. But even this then is limited to having a rounded crown, which is great, and it's perfect for a typical cloche or a lot of hat styles. But if you want to get into making some more interesting or unusual shapes for your crowns, the puzzle block molds that you'll sometimes find on eBay are occasionally available, particularly if a milliner is going out of business, but I can't believe how much they go for. I've seen them go for $450, $500, even $550, almost $600, so way out of my price range, and even competitive at that. It's hard. You have to kind of be there right at the minute that the auction is ending in order to get one, so it's kind of crazy. And so I was pursuing ways of making molds myself. And a couple of years ago, I signed up for a millinery class here in the theater department, the costume department of the theater school locally. And during that semester, we learned a lot of great milliner techniques, again, which I'll be sharing with you in the online felt hat workshop. In particular, we worked with buckram hats, but all those great techniques for finishing the hats and working all those nice finishing steps that really transform a hat from just a hat to a hat, I can now apply to felt hats, which is great. And in the course of taking that semester in millinery, I also learned these two methods of making a hat block. And the first one, again, is limited. I'm going to show you that, but it's inexpensive and has a roll. And the other method is fabulous. I mean, it really is only limited by your imagination. And it's also inexpensive, and it's just an incredibly great way to save a lot of money and space on collecting hat forms. So stay tuned for our launch of the online felt hat workshop, again, later this spring or summer. In the meantime, let me show you how to make a hat block. Shouldn't turn my back to the camera there, sorry about that. Let me clear a little space and show you this method. So for this method, what you're going to need is a hat which you are willing to sacrifice. So obviously that's the first limitation of this method. You don't necessarily want to sacrifice a great hat in order to make a mold to duplicate it. However, this could come into play if you were at a thrift shop, an antique store, and happened to see a ratty old hat, but you happen to like the shape of it. Maybe the fabric is faded or torn and ripped, but you love the shape of it. And if you can pick it up reasonably, then it could make a great mold for you. In this case, this is a hat I just picked up at, I don't know, TJ Maxx or Marshall's or something like that. It was $10 just for the purpose of this demonstration. But here's another thing. It doesn't even have to be an antique hat, and it doesn't have to be felt. It could be straw. It could be made out of any material. So if you see a hat you just love the shape of and you want to duplicate it, and it doesn't cost you too much money, you may be willing to buy that hat and use it and sacrifice it to make a block. So that's what I've done here. So you need a hat you're willing to sacrifice. You want to get either some really stiff hairspray, or if you're a hat felter and you're already working with some of the milliner stiffening agents, you can use those as well. I just personally have played with those a bit, and I don't really like using them on my hats, and I don't like the chemicals that are involved, etc. So I don't keep that on hand anymore. So I grabbed a can of very stiff hairspray. But again, you can use the milliner's stiffening agent if you want. So the purpose of this is to make whatever hat you have, whether it's straw, felt, or fabric, stiff, because you need to have it nice and firm in order to create the mold from it. So you'll want to apply whatever stiffening agent you have to the outside of your hat, and I usually put on a pretty good coat, and then I let it sit and dry. I'll come back, 15 minutes, half an hour, a day later, whatever, put on another coat, let it dry, another coat, however many coats you need to make sure it's nice and stiff and will hold its shape when you make the mold. So some sort of stiffening agent, pretty inexpensive. The next thing you're going to need is either a spray like Pam, which you use to keep, to get the brownies out of the pan easier, but without using a lot of adding calories with butter. I don't happen to have that on hand, because I like to use butter. Anyway, I do have petroleum jelly on hand because we use that when we make buckram hats. And so I'm going to demonstrate with this, but you need some sort of lubricant, and the purpose of this is to coat the inside of the hat so that we can pull the block out more readily. So petroleum jelly or Pam or some other brand, I don't have any vested interest in that company, whatever company is that makes that, but some sort of lubricant that allows you to remove the block easily. And then you'll also want some saran wrap or plastic wrap of some sort, and you can see why. I did a block in here without using it, and you can see that some of the foam spray, which I'm going to show you in a minute, that we used to create the block, is adhered to the inside of the hat again. So to prevent that, once you have lubricated the inside of the hat with either your petroleum jelly or your Pam spray, then we're going to use the plastic wrap to stick to that slick, oily coating and to line the hat so it's easier to get the block out without messing up the hat. Because you may want to use this a second time, because when you make this block, it's not a permanent block, and that's one of the other limitations of this particular method. It's lightweight, so you can't really, you can pin into it, which is great, so you can stretch the felt that way, and you can certainly, steam and press with your iron and steam on the block to create the shape, but it's not heavy like a balsa block, and you can't really expect to pull an awful lot of weight against it when you're stretching your felt. But so I sort of consider the blocks that I make in this method as sort of single use. They're inexpensive enough, and I'll do it once. Maybe I'll get a second block out of it, and then I throw it away. But anyway, you may want to reuse the hat again to create another block, since they aren't permanent. So line it with some saran wrap. So you've hardened the outside by either spraying your hairspray or applying your millinery stiffening agent to the outside. You've put on several coats, and it's dry, and it's the stiffness you want. You've coated the inside with either your spray Pam or your petroleum jelly, and then you've lined it with the saran wrap, or plastic wrap, I guess I should say, so that the inside of your hat is protected. Then what you want to also get, and this is just about the last consumable you're going to use, is a can of this expandable foam, and I'm sure there are different brands. You can pick it up at any hardware store, and they say, you should read the instructions, safety instructions for using whatever brand you get. This one suggests you wear gloves, which I do, because it is really sticky, almost like Gorilla Glue. So wear gloves while you're using it. It also suggests you wear safety glasses, and I have prescription glasses, so I'll put those on when I insert the foam anyway. So those are the last few things you need: gloves, protective eyewear, and a can of the expandable foam. Now on this particular brand it says you should only fill your, whatever you're trying to fill, about a little less than half of the way. But in my experience that doesn't work for this application. It may for whatever they actually use this stuff for. But in my experience, and I've made some really bad molds this way and I've made some good ones. So my experience is that, first of all, when you're, after you shake it heavily and you then add your spray nozzle and you're spraying the foam in here, first of all, you want to spray very methodically and orderly, and you want to be sure you don't create air pockets, because if you create air pockets as you're laying your foam in here, you might think, oh, that's okay, because the whole point of this is that it expands into the space. But if you leave too big an air pocket, it's not going to expand into that space, and instead you're going to have a weakness in your block. So what you want to do is very methodically lay it in concentric circles, or whatever works for you given the shaping of your hat. And I have also found, so that's one important thing, don't leave air pockets. The second thing is, the first couple of times I used this method, I followed the advice I'd been given in that class I took, and also what I'd read on the can, and I only filled it the first time a third of the way, because that's what I've been told. It didn't expand nearly enough. The second time I followed the can's instructions, I went half of the way. That wasn't nearly good enough. So now I really come up almost to about a half inch or so shy of the brim. And importantly, just like if you're baking, a cake or something, you usually knock the pan a couple times in the counter so that it settles and is even in the pan. You don't want, the batter mounded in the center. You don't want your foam mounded in the center anyway, because then it's going to expand only in that direction, which is fine if you end up with a curve here. You can always slice it off so that it lays flat on the table so that you can stretch over it. But what happens is it expands this way as opposed to out to the side. So if you don't come up high enough on the brim, or on the crown I should say, of your hat that you're trying to mimic, what will happen is it'll be too shallow of a head form. So you really want to be sure you fill it high enough that it's going to expand out and give you the depth in the crown that you need in order to stretch your felt over it. So just save yourself making a couple of bad blocks like I did, and be methodical in how you fill it in, and fill it more to the brim than the can would suggest. And then you have to let it sit and cure for, let it go 48 hours, if you have the time. Even if you think, because here's another mistake I made, that it's firm and you try to pull it out, if it hasn't completely cured inside, you're going to lose the shape. So really give it a couple of days. I think this can says you can mist it with water and that will expedite the curing process, but I've never done that. I just fill it, I go away, I let it sit, I come back a couple days later. And this is what happens if you don't use the plastic to line it. So that's why it's important to use the plastic, or you'll leave little bits of this foam on your felt. And not that you're going to be wearing this hat again anyway, but if you ever wanted to use this hat again to create another form, this would get in your way and be kind of messy, although I suppose you could chip it out. Anyway, so that's kind of a quick and dirty little method of replicating a hat form that maybe you like or you have and you just want to update. Again, its limitations are you have to ruin a hat in order to create a new hat form. The second thing is that the form you get is, consider it maybe a one, maybe a two use, and then a throwaway, so you're going to have to keep doing it again. So there are limitations to it. It's also only as deep as your crown, the crown of the hat is, as opposed to when you're working with a real hat block, there's always extra room for you to really pull down and get tight. So my experience is that any form I've made from hats using this method have been a little shallower than I wanted them to be. So if you see a hat that is even deeper than maybe fits you well, that actually would be good for making one of these foam blocks, because you can always shave it down to a shallower size if you want. anyway, I hope that that's helpful, and keep your eyes on our website and or our newsletter for more information about the upcoming online felt hat workshop. I'm really excited about it. We have a lot of fun talking about what styles of hats are best suited to what face shapes and how you can figure out what your facial shape is. We also talk about a lot of different felting techniques for creating the hats, as well as laying out the hat, felting it, shaping it, and then the really kind of important millinery stuff, which really, I'm so pleased that I took that class, because I learned a lot about stitching and finishing hats, that making the buckram hats that applies to felt hats, and really will bring your hat level, felt hat making level, to a whole new level. So I hope you can join us for that. Thanks!